I have with me two consummate practitioners of what is public affairs, the session that has been granted to us. And I think it's very useful to, without any ado, get one of you gentlemen to start by telling some of us out there what public affairs really means.
Is it audible? Yeah, public affairs, I would say, with due apology to Parul, it's like that Japanese bamboo. It does not, only difference in India is perhaps, it does not grow on the top, it grows on the, under the ground. Public affairs, and another thing, observation I have, the topic is decoding the decoding the nature of public affairs in India. With again due apology to Dilip, who is really perhaps the oldest practitioner of this trade. This public affairs, whatever little I have seen during my 5.5 years of PR life, is viewed as government relation only. Am I right, Dilip? In fact, that public affairs itself, there is a word called public as well as affairs. And public does not mean only government. So merely knowing some secretary, taking him out for lunch or dinner, or getting some paper from out of the government file, which of course is an offense, non-bailable, is not public affairs. Anyway, I am constrained to talk about my clients or my experience. I cannot do that. In fact, that is a very major problem. But I would just cite one case. Many of you have read, perhaps, in your textbooks, those who have studied communication, that issue of, I think, torching the, what is it? That famous case of Eddie Burney, where he actually created, you know, an event for a cigarette company. I think, what is the company? Cigarette Light or something is the company. In 1929, on Easter Monday, where 10 ladies, actually that was the problem at that time, the ladies were not smoking in public. Some of them were smoking surreptitiously, but not in public. So he wanted that people should, girls should come out and smoke, so that, you know, this cigarette consumption increases. So Eddie Burney created that case, where on, I think it was Easter Monday of 1929, 10 ladies, he carefully selected them, but nobody knew who did it. They came out in the Easter parade in New York, somewhere on the 5th Avenue or somewhere. They lighted cigarette, and they kept on walking. The next day it was a major news, and thereafter such same events spontaneously happened in many other cities in USA, and cigarette consumption among the women were not, did not remain a taboo. Now, some people will say it is a marketing exercise. Some people will say, but nobody knew for which company he did it. Some people may call it a PR exercise. But I believe that this also qualifies as a public affairs exercise. I do not know whether Rajiv will agree with that. But basically, he changed the system. He changed the fashion of the day and created a market for a product. I think public affairs in India should be viewed in that context. And I am sure with Mr. Kejriwal arriving on the scene, people will start thinking in that line and not merely address this public affairs activity merely to the government.
So what we hear from you, and thank you for this, Sugato, is that public affairs is not merely brand or PR or the activity of government relations, but is something else. Now, I still think that there's enough meat on the bone for Rajiv to attack and tell us what public affairs, before we start decoding its nature in India. Let's get the public affairs part out of the way.
Yeah, okay, thanks. Good afternoon, everybody. I'd like to start by complimenting Kunal and his team for putting together a fairly intense program and to have a fairly comprehensive agenda, which was pretty good. And thanks to all of you for lasting through it. I bring a perspective from the client side. I've had the fortune of working with companies like American Express and Dell and Max and do something on my own and things like that. Public affairs defining it, and we were talking about it before, and we were wondering whether it needs to get academic or does it need to be applied. I think the difference between academic definitions and applied definitions is very important because you're all practitioners of this function. The business always focuses on its key constituents, and those constituents are traditionally shareholders, employees, customers, and some business associates. There is a whole set of touch points which a company has, which a product has, which is outside of these classical four constituencies. And it's that which is really the domain that public affairs addresses. Not that it does not address shareholders, it does not address customers, it does. But in addition to all of these, so it's actually the art and science of managing your business environment in such a way that you compete without disadvantage. I hate double negatives, but the reason why I chose to say that it is competing without disadvantage is because that is when public affairs comes into play. You will find in all the work that you do in the public relations domain or in the public affairs domain is most called for when you are facing disadvantage. Unfortunately, that is the case. We end up being crisis managers or issue managers rather than being, so we are mostly reactive rather than being proactive. And the whole point about decoding public affairs is to be able to create a practice where its practitioners understand that public affairs is an ongoing exercise of managing relations with all stakeholders in your business environment. There are various countries which
does that include internal stakeholders so that
yes.
they're clear?
So the classical stakeholders that everybody addresses are shareholders, employees, and customers. So the employees are taken care of well or not is a matter of organization or how well you do it. But employees are definitely taken care of. And employees and employee representatives, which includes, let's say, their collective bargaining arrangements through unions or committees or whatever they form. So internal stakeholders are taken care of in that sense. Shareholders, which is large, small, public, if you're listed, unlisted, if you have private equity players who are participating in it, are taken care under the shareholder umbrella. And the reason that each of these are critical to a company, the ability to manage these sets of stakeholders are evolved, are getting better. But it is governments, regulators, pressure groups. If your product has environmental impact, it has what your social or commitments to society around you are. So there's a variety of stakeholders that are there.
Right. So I'll stay with this for 1 second and then toss over to Sugato. What, in your judgment, is the percentage? I know it's an unfair question, but allow me to. What is the percentage of government affairs in public affairs? Is it 10%, 20%, 50%, 80%? First, Rajiv.
Yeah, okay. It's hard to say generically. It depends on the kind of business you're in. It depends on the kind of market you're in. And it depends on what stage of organization you're in. If you're a startup in a highly regulated or deregulating environment, for example, the insurance industry deregulated a few years back, in the public affairs function, probably 80% of work was government affairs. Post-deregulation, post more stable policies coming into play, post more competitive environment having gotten established, perhaps the role on government affairs is down to 30%.
Right. So it's certainly not 100% as Sugato very provocatively, pardon my, it said it's not a relations with the secretary and getting a paper out of the way.
You are absolutely right. Public affairs, certainly not mainly with or only with the government. And even from the government side, we have seen many a times, in fact, in my previous avatar working in a chamber, I had seen cases where government used to toss the idea to us. We were supposed to give do a seminar, create an environment so that the government can take a step in that direction. As a matter of fact, I can readily say universal banking, which turned all these financial institutions like ICICI Bank, etc., into a banking institute, that paper was pushed by us only.
So do you guys sense in a yes or no adequate understanding and appreciation in India Inc. about the sophisticated nature of public affairs? Yes or no? Is there enough understanding what public affairs really is rather than pushing a file with the secretary?
Some people, definitely those who are serious about this business, they understand it. But if you go by the sheer number, those who talk about public affairs loosely, they do not understand.
So how much of public affairs is actually understood? Would you say 10% people understand public affairs?
Again, here you have to judge it by the value. In value terms, of course, I would say the majority they understand.
Majority understand, that's good.
In value terms. In volume terms, no, they don't.
That's a safe answer. Good, so I think we have a fair understanding of how expanded a public affairs mandate today looks like. We have a fair understanding of what it is not. Now I would turn to Rajiv to quickly tell us what are the true quality of personnel available for public affairs in India. Do you sense we are pretty much equipped and populated for the kind of needs of public affairs that you talked about?
No, we're not. We're not because I think the organizations that actually provide such services haven't actually or can provide such services because there are hardly any that actually provide such services. And those that have done so in the past have done so in addition to what their core area of service is. And they've done that because those practices have been built around individuals. There are some individuals who, like Sugato said, have access to their classmates from school time who are now occupying positions of prominence and who can then get them, get a company somebody's ear. Intellectually, you still have to sell your case. So what I want to do here is for young people here to understand, really to dehyphenate, to use a term from diplomacy, from the bagman or the corruption, the cloudy kind of environment that people have, exactly, to be able to separate the two.
Walmart bribes.
To separate the two. The thing is that there is enough and more learning and capability building and a career in the public affairs space in spite of these things. There is an importance given or accorded to public affairs in several global multinational companies where it is perhaps one of the most powerful weapon in the corporate arsenal. It is, again, it's about taking care of disadvantage, but when you actually use it on an ongoing basis to create advantage is when it comes to the, into its own. So no, there isn't enough interest in it from service providers. There isn't obviously enough understanding of it as a career choice. The fact is that public affairs, and to your question earlier, there's a Harvard Business Review article which said out of the most successful Fortune 100 companies, the CEOs spent more than 60% of their time on public affairs. So if you were to look at the companies that performed well on the Dow Jones out of the Fortune 100, 60% of the CEO's time was spent on public affairs. And the people who assist the CEO participate in decision making. They're able to be close to to understand the dynamics of decision making at the CXO level. And that is probably the most important learning. And from a career path perspective as well, there are a lot of people who've been performing the public affairs function, who necessarily have to have business knowledge, but who can then graduate into corporate strategy roles or into roles that run large businesses. So I think personally, having run the function, having been in the business and then chosen this out of an interest for it, and then I believe that public affairs is a great career choice.